Hello, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martijn Lofvers. I'm the Chief Trendwatcher of Supply Chain Media. I'm also the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement. That's a quarterly magazine in Europe, but also on a digital phrase, we have one. And we're a huge group, over, I think, 50,000 members on LinkedIn and a bi-weekly newsletter. And I'm also the architect of the SCM IT Subway Map Europe. We'll discuss it later. And the good news is we have a live webinar and we're going to talk about supply chain software. We talk about IT portfolios. We talk about the rise of AI. We will have an interesting conversation, and we are in exciting times, but also in confusing times, I might say. And for that purpose, I have two experts who will join me in this conversation. So next to me, in the middle, you see Jonathon Karelse. He studied econometrics at a law school, and then he moved into an MBA. Did a lot of consulting and started NorthFind, I think 40 years ago, Jonathon, right?
That's right. Yep.
So, and started out a lot of in supply chain planning, but it's all end to end from the highest level, strategic to into the factories to compress lead times, that kind of stuff. So you see a lot of companies with a business in US, Canada, also in Europe. So that's something. So welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And Peter Schram, also studied like me industrial engineering and management science in university in Eindhoven, Technical University, and into consulting, but also working for Picard, Signify, or what used to be Philips, in planning, S&OP, and also in consulting, doing a lot of stuff. And since the last, I think, 5 years, you have your own advisory firm.
Yes,
And
that's right. Yep.
and as of late, also doing interim business with the BDR Thermia Group. They are producers of hydrogen boilers and heat pumps. So you are also in the business right now. And no, well, maybe we can address it, what the challenges are over there.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, nice to have you. And they are both experts, because also Peter has also been working at Gartner as a senior director analyst, so that it might be also ring a bell for the audience. All right, a few things for the audience. You are on mute. This will be recorded. The PDF will be made available. You can ask questions. So on the right hand side, you see the chat functionality. Yes, you can chat, but I won't track it. Please, if you have asked a question to one of us or all of us, use the Q&A functionality on the right hand side. You see the small text bubbles on the right hand side. So if the questions are related to the things we are discussing at that moment, I will ask these questions at that time. If not, we'll have some Q&A time at the end. So feel free to engage us, and then we'll make sure that you get your answers, hopefully. All right, and if you have some more questions, we will have a table in the virtual lounge right after this, after the whole hour. So you can join us at table 1. It's easy to get there, and we won't bite. So if you have some questions, we will have some further conversation. That would be nice. All right, as of this moment, we're putting off our cameras. So basically, you can enlarge your screen, and you have seen us, so we're live. So and Peter and Jonathon, you can put off your camera, and then you have the opportunity to open up your slides and have a better view. All right, now first, it's these are turbulent times. Trump is in The Hague, for NATO, that kind of stuff. So there are all things happening, but basically, this is an overview of what our CEOs talking about, and this is also AI created. These are the transcriptions of quarterly earning calls of CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and basically, what are they talking about? And on the right hand side is a log scale. See the ones, this is growing attention. So you see in yellow, AI is growing in attention, and the most important one is the red ones are tariffs. So these are high attention and growing, and that's out of nowhere. Tariffs is the number one topic being talked about. Jonathon, in your area, in your conversations, what are they talking about when you have conversations with your customers?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of the same thing in conversation. Obviously, tariff is a great icebreaker when you're talking to anybody new. Everyone wants to talk about it. Everybody wants to talk about the best way of, for instance, scenario planning, managing which way the tariffs go, because that's another element here. It's not that we're dealing with a tariff event. We're dealing with the volatility of tariffs swinging this way and that. But I think for me, what one of the most important parts of this slide is, and it's a super interesting slide, is that I think in practice there's a big gap between what people say or what people are talking about and what they do. Um, so there's absolutely a lot of conversation around tariff. There's a lot of conversation around AI, which makes sense. I'm surprised to see sustainability still as high as that because, frankly, it's I think losing some of its gloss.
Mhm.
But in practice, what people are doing often doesn't match what they're saying. Um, a lot of people, even during COVID, who were talking about reshoring and nearshoring and friendshoring, it happened a bit. Market leaders actually took action, but for the vast majority of companies who said they were going to be looking at risk management or said they were going to be looking at nearshoring or driving volatility out of supply chains, they just continued doing business as usual. And to me, that's the takeaway here. There are people doing things about AI. There are people doing things about responding to tariffs, but it's all the other people who are just talking about it who are going to be left behind.
Yeah. Peter, what is your observation when you look at this slide?
Well, honestly, the camera is off, but I almost had to laugh when you started your speech, Jonathon, because kind of I see more or less the same. And of course, I'm a bit in a different role right now because I'm doing an interim role, let's say in a company. But I see at least that I'm being approached all the time by companies who have all kind of buzzwords, right?
Yeah,
And kind of
exactly.
there's always a bit kind of for me of a reality check saying, okay, but is this now what companies are really doing, or maybe better, how many companies are actually doing that? And so for me, this is a bit kind of the discussion about is this now really hype or is it what people are really working on?
Yeah, and when we had this previous conversation before this, you mentioned hiring freeze in the upper left. Is kind of interest. Is that a result of AI, or is it people are worried, and American companies are putting on the brakes. We will fire some people that makes
Exactly,
it
yeah.
easier for us for our P&L, whatever.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
AI has become a convenient pretext for right sizing, but I don't think it's related at all. We're definitely seeing efficiencies being found by companies that are deploying AI effectively, but that isn't happening at the kind of frequency or scale that explains the kind of right sizing that you're seeing in workforces. And I think AI has become a convenient scapegoat for organizations or for
Yeah.
commentators and pundits to try to connect these two dots, but I don't think they're connected yet.
No, and based on on the scraping and its kind of notion how much has been mentioned by CEOs about tariffs. That's right. But interesting, lower left, you see digital twin, and actually a digital supply chain twin could be a solution to address the tariffs and create different kind of scenarios. So the CEOs might not know this, but when you look at this slide, we have asked 81 senior supply chain executives in Europe in the fall last year, and we asked them, where do you expect that applications will be used for the near future? So where do you find the right usage? And you see digital supply chain twins in the middle, and most of them are AI related. But like you said, AI, Jonathon, it's like the wishes. But
Yes.
this explains what they think they can
Yes.
use the applications for.
That's exactly right. We're working with a very large B2B and online retailer in the States who is, I believe, one of the world's top 3 distributors of office equipment. Um, and they are right now, well, we were initially engaged to evaluate the effectiveness of their proprietary and homegrown forecasting algorithms. But basically, they've got a mandate from on high that they need to deploy an AI solution in their demand planning. And our question was, why? I mean, is the goal the AI or is the goal the outcome? And the goal, frankly, for them was the AI because people in marketing had talked about how this company was going to be at the leading edge of digital transformation. So they frankly, and this is why I'm not saying the company's name, they frankly didn't care what the outcome was so much as they could talk about having AI enabled in their supply chain decision making, which to me is kind of hilarious because it defeats the purpose. We're hopefully driving for outcomes.
Yeah,
And
yeah, Peter.
sorry to interrupt you, Martijn, but
No.
building on what you're saying, Jonathon, I was also thinking about, there's a lot of terms in here, but does from CEO perspective, do these people even know what it means, right?
Exactly.
So there's so many things coming at you, so it's also quite difficult to understand basically what all these things mean, and what they could mean for your company. And I think that's why I was saying in the beginning a bit, so it feels for me a lot of times still buzzwords, because the practical application of it is still quite unclear very often.
Yeah, no, totally right. And two things. Professor Carlos Cardon, he is professor at IMD Business School. He's interviewing now CEOs of multinationals, but also the chief supply chain officers within the same company. Basically, do the CEOs have the right view on what supply chain is bringing to the table? On one hand, and do feel supply chain officers recognize in all this? And one curious thing he stumbled upon, CEOs have a high belief that AI will be the magic bullet for all kind of problems, whether in HR, IT, finance, etc. So also in supply chain, that's what they see. The flip side is there's an opportunity for supply chain, but what I noticed that supply chain executives have a hard time to sell what they are needing and how they could apply AI in their field, because in some companies they are using AI algorithms for already a decade or whatever. So what else is new for them? For some companies they are already using it, and some other areas they say, where can I use a chatbot in demand planning? Is that worth something? So maybe supply chain people are also not able to sell how to use AI in supply chain. What do you think, Jonathon?
I definitely agree with you. And I think one of the challenges of when we talk about AI in a big capital A and a big capital I is that AI is nuanced, as you know. There's a lot of different flavors of AI, and even the idea of ML. And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but to me, machine learning is something distinct from AI. Machine learning is math, and people have loved to concatenate AI with ML, but it's a completely distinct field. AI has a lot of different forms and applications, and I think this is one of the challenges when supply chain folks are looking at solutions. They're thinking AI is AI, and they've got an idea of what they think AI is, which may not match the AI that's being enabled in whatever solution they're evaluating. We're still things are moving, like you both said, at a very rapid pace right now. And there's a lot of folks who are they're not even close to keeping up with where we're at.
Yeah.
So we are, I think, for the next few years, going to see things move so quickly that those who are at the head of the curve are going to make some high profile mistakes or have some high profile breakthroughs. And it's going to take a while before things begin to stabilize to the point where the average practitioner is able to really effectively make use of this stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe kind of a comment to that as well, John. So maybe if I'm listening to what you're saying, Martijn, I think without even looking at all the technologies, I think in general, I think for people in supply chain, and maybe I'm generalizing here a bit, it's already quite difficult to explain to people outside of the field of supply chain what they're doing and why it matters, right? And I think that problem only becomes larger when you also add kind of the complexity of technology into that. So that's already difficult. So I think my plea is not that you should not start with something like digital things, right? Because it is really important. But I think you should somewhere link it to how, and that's also of course quite obvious, to how can you create some business value with it.
Yeah. Then we'll talk about it later because we have some formats to how to address this. One point here, I speak to a lot of supply chain practitioners, from planners to executives, and also when I talk to executives, I know quite a few more mature companies where you have supply chain executives where they have a right hand who is totally aware what's happening technology wise, that could advise internally what they should use. So I know a well-known CPG company, and I know this person well. He's the right hand of the CSCO, and he knows what is working well for them, in what they have tried out, what has failed, etc., to explain it to the CSCO where to look for and what not. So that's you need also within your own team a right hand to make sense of it all, and that's we're going to talk later. And one thing, and then this is what I create every year. So I'm the architect of this overview, and basically this is say 12 magic quarters in one. Basically, this resembles what has been implemented in Europe: ERP, WMS, TMS, SNV, you name it. All the different flavors are here, and basically this subway map represents what has implemented by which originally a supply chain software vendor. So Oracle and SAP are the bigger ones. So they have a lot of software stations because they have a lot of kind of implementations of WMS, ERP, you name it. You have to have some minimum threshold before you get a subway station. So this is not what they offer, but this is resembles what they have actually implemented. And I can talk for hours, but I won't. So basically, one thing for this version of this year, sustainability software, we have split in two software lines. One is about scope 3. Do you measure scope 3 emissions, actual emissions? So not the general rule of thumb figures, but actual from the trucks and that kind of stuff. That's one thing. And another area is the product passport. Do you know the bill of material, where it's coming from? In some areas, it's all mandatory that you will give the product passport, your whole bill of material. Where is it coming from? In the Netherlands, for example, the governments require a product passport if you are tendering furniture. So you have to hand over the whole bill of material. Where is the bill of material coming from this chair up to the bolts and the leather, etc. So that's another area. So that's one thing that I split up here. And another thing what I see happening is, digital supply chain twins coming up. So you used to have supply chain network design, but now it's getting more in the area of digital supply chain twins on a higher level to see, creating scenarios for your global footprint, and sometimes based on even actual data of SKUs from your ERP system. So these are the two main areas I see changing rapidly. And yes, in both areas you need AI. In sustainability, you have to scrape data from your suppliers, etc. And in the digital supply chain twin space, you have to design your network, your suppliers, and also you have to use some intelligence to get this data from either your ERP system and your suppliers, but also outside world to see, how can I create scenarios. Jonathon, first, when you look at this, what do you see if you look this complex environment, and what are companies asking you for to look at?
Yeah. So what the subway map really highlights for me, and really this is the reason that our practice increasingly is finding itself in the software selection space, because we're not a software selection advisory. And in fact, we try to be as software ambivalent as we can be. Software is obviously a necessary enabler, but we don't sell it, we don't implement it. We provide subject matter expertise during implementation. That's it. But the landscape is busy, and beyond the landscape being busy, there is a huge gap in the capabilities of those companies that are rapidly developing. And I know the call today, or the discussion today, isn't about AI, but AI is going to be part of the discussion, because it's a really important part of digital transformation today. There's companies making effective use of it. There's other companies marketing it effectively, let's say, but not really deploying it. And then there's others that just haven't shown up at the party yet. And I think what the subway map really emphasizes for me is the gap between some of the largest ERPs. There's one in Germany, who I won't call by name, and two in the States, that have done a great job of selling the idea that there's a huge advantage to remaining within their ecosystem, that it is not advantageous to get best in breed solutions because deployment and integration is so complicated. And if you get their solution, it's a fully integrated end-to-end solution. But the reality is, even these so-called integrated solutions are running APIs in the back end. They're still under the hood. They're still a collection of individual modules and programs. So one of the first points we make to our customers, especially those who have CTOs who are really sold on remaining within the ecosystem of their existing ERP, is there are very few fully integrated solutions, number one. Number two, it isn't bad to go and select best in breed solutions, because if the outcome is, going back to an earlier comment, the goal rather than the technology being the goal, it makes sense to try to find the technology that best drives the outcome and not vice versa. A lot of people, when they talk about digital transformation, get hung up on the idea of the digital part of it, thinking, hey, if I get a new solution, I will transform. But what they don't understand is the transformation has to happen, and the digital is the enabling part. So every year you publish this, every year the landscape gets more and more complex. And I think that's daunting for a lot of people. And that's why things like Gartner, where Peter used to advise, become a convenient pretext for people. People want to have a simple way of looking at the landscape, but the reality is there isn't a simple way that's effective.
Peter, you've been working at Gartner, and now you are in a different environment. What is your look on this?
Yeah, so first of all, I like this a lot. So it gives really a kind of a nice overview of what is available in the market space. On the other hand, I always get a bit like, okay, but how am I going to make sense out of this? Right? It's
We talk about it later.
it's so much and it's so complicated. So and if I think that, my assumption is always probably other people will think of that the same. So my take on this, so this is kind of really a great overview. But what am I going to do, and how am I going to prioritize, and how does this all work together? And I think that's for me probably the biggest challenge that I see in the current IT landscape that I think most supply chain managers have to deal with. Huh?
Yeah, we will answer this because I have the answers, but maybe
Great.
haven't put it across it directly. Now,
No.
before we get there, so getting back to your point, Peter, this is my visualization of how an end-to-end supply chain looks like. From the left you have your suppliers, your tier 1, 2, 3, and beyond. On the right you have your channels, the end users, consumers, etc. And in the middle you have your own company. That could be also very complex. It's all kind of applications, a whole stack. And also you have your different horizons: short-term, mid-term, long-term. Also, strategic orientation, operational orientation, and you have different kind of focus points. So when I have a conversation with supply chain director at first, I will take this slide and I ask him or her, so painted a big red circle. Where does it hurt? Is it on the right, on the left? Is it low or below? Where is it? Basically, so this is, where does it hurt and where do you want to improve? So this is, and maybe Peter, this is maybe your approach. Where do you think you can add some value? Where to start looking or not?
Yes, and once again, so I also really like this picture, right? So because it's a bit like the value stream plotted and also the different planning horizons. And I think kind of to your point, Martijn, I think the first point should be somewhere to paint here, okay, but where am I today? So what do I have and where do I have the biggest white spots? And I think kind of by logic, I would say, okay, but if I have an objective, so whatever it is in my supply chain, where should I invest first? And I think that's somewhere I would say the starting point of trying to cut the elephant into pieces. So that's more a bit on the approach. What I find difficult, and also what we discuss in our pre-talk, Martijn, is that in my current role, I'm being approached by a lot of different vendors, and sometimes I have a hard time plotting them on this picture. Right, so I don't understand why they are and what they're basically doing to kind of make up my mind. So I think there's also a challenge there for vendors to become much more clear on, okay, but what they can actually help me with. Does that
Maybe
make sense?
yeah, that makes sense, and that's why I created this assessment. I developed an assessment together with Henkel, Unilever, HP, and J&J in 2019, and then I launched it in March 2020. At the start of COVID, hundreds of downloads, even by Gartner, McKinsey,
Yep.
PwC, and a lot of manufacturing, wholesale, and retail companies. So basically, it's 30 boxes like this, and each individual box has 3 questions: simple yes, no. Either you haven't or you haven't, and in doubt, it's a no. Basically, if it's 3 times yes, it's fully colored. It's 3 times no, you have a white spot. So basically, this is an example of a company with different kind of white spots. And if you do it with your supply chain leadership team, and you ask them, each of them, to fill out, within half an hour, where you have your white spots. You don't even need consultants like Jonathon or Peter. You can do it yourself. Yeah, in the next step, you need some advice what to do next, because then you have, like here, 7 white spots. How do you prioritize these? If you are in operational excellence, you'll probably take the lowest 3. If you are customer intimacy, you take the ones on the right side in the green area. If you are in product leadership environment like FMCG or ASML, whatever, you probably took at the highest level of 3 white spots. Or you can say, okay, we advance the medium to the full blown 100%. So this is how I would address it. And back to your point, Peter, rightly so. Which box are they addressing? Ask the vendors. Yeah, all fine with your magic bullet, but please tell me which bullet you are addressing, and maybe it's fitting my white spot. So
I like this methodology,
Yeah.
Martijn. I like how it. I mean, it's not super simple, but it simplifies a complex landscape. I think one consideration, though, and this will be a shameless plug for why maybe people still need consultants like Peter and I, is I think if you take this to an organization, or you take any kind of self-evaluation to an organization, and you ask somebody, they'll be able to fill it out.
Yep.
You ask 3 people, maybe you'll still be directionally aligned. You ask 10 people, and you can start to see a lot of differences in what people think the white spots are. And I think the challenge there is, especially when there's a question in the chat, how do you narrow down the landscape to something more manageable?
Yeah.
I think one of the errors that a lot of companies make in software selection today is thinking that they've got the capability of asking their own stakeholders for requirements. And what happens then is typically a restatement of the existing case with maybe a couple of other thoughts. If you go back a slide and look at how complex this landscape is, you can't reasonably expect that a person who's been in an organization for 5 or 10 or 15 years is going to have any idea what all the various leading edge technologies look like. So when they're describing what they have or don't have, it's based on a very narrow and insular view of reality. So I want to be clear. I think this is a very, very effective way of quickly identifying gaps.
Yeah.
But I think there's also another layer here of, I think internally you'll have a lot of differing opinions about what the gaps are. And sometimes that's why it may be helpful to have that neutral third set of eyes on the problem to help sort of triangulate the solution.
Indeed, I totally agree. I did it with a multinational and a well-known packaging manufacturing company, and I did this with the supply chain leadership team, 10 people, and they filled it out. And in logistics, they said, we have it, whereas in procurement, they didn't know they had this application.
Yeah.
So and even though and sometimes some are using it in the right way, some they don't know how to use it, whatever. Yeah, you're totally right. But you get to address the Peter's point. So okay, what process is it addressing? And that's it.
Yes.
These are all processes.
There's another dimension here too to answer the question in the chat. Requirements are unfortunately only one part of the equation, and they're probably the easiest to answer. I mean, if I've landed on, let's just say 10 requirements that I need to address my white spots, it's pretty easy to look in the marketplace and be able to vet the vendors who can address those 10 requirements that you've got. But there's a lot of additional consideration that should go into selection once you've got that short list. And that includes, what is the implementation experience going to look like? How is this, is the way I'm addressing this white spot going to play well with the rest of my architecture? And what does life look like after deployment? And unfortunately, I mean, there's a lot of very, very high profile fails where companies have spent hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars on technology, only to have the thing fail at implementation because they didn't consider what happens after that.
Yeah. You're right. And the next slide, how to build the right stack, and this is a slide. Well, basically, it's based on
exactly.
Pace layered application strategy, and I think it's already this slide is 10 or 15 years old. So can you imagine? You need a system of records down below your ERP environments where you have your order administration, and in the middle you have your system of differentiation where you have your planning environment, WMS, TMS, etc. And on top you have your system of innovation. So that's basically what this slide is explaining. The only main thing what has changed since the last 10, 15 years is the smarter communication companies have created a data layer in between to make sure they don't have a hard bolt-on API on top of their ERP system. But also the thing, what kind of data do you put in your data lake? Don't make the mistake, 20 years ago with a business warehouse to replicate all your data in ERP in a database. That doesn't make any sense. So your data lake has to be a simplified version of what's stored in your ERP system. So Peter, this is coming from your Gartner background where you have been working. So is it still relevant, the space layer application strategy?
Yeah, I guess so, right? So I don't use it, to be honest, let's say in daily life a lot, but I think kind of in terms of logic, it makes a lot of sense. And for me, kind of the key questions, and I think we also discussed this before. So yes, Jonathan, I think kind of the assessment is already complicated. My question is always, but how do we change? And I see a lot of companies who make a plan, and they're quite good at making a plan, but they're not so good at kind of ruthlessly kind of executing upon that plan to get the results out. And kind of if I reflect a bit on this picture is, okay, but if I see this, so I see a logic of how you could build up your system landscape. But if I'm at a low level, right? So let's assume that I'm level 1 or level 2. What am I going to do, right? Am I first going to build my system of record and then my system of differentiation or system of innovation? Or am I going to try to do things in parallel? So that's more a question about kind of the strategy that you take, but also kind of how you become very good in executing on that and getting the results out. Because to your point, Jonathan, I see a lot of companies who have spent millions of euros in these kind of things, but in the end, they don't get the value out. Huh?
And I see, yeah, and I, you can respond, John, but what I see, a lot of companies feel hijacked by their ERP vendors to go to one ERP instances. I've been
Yeah.
an American company have 17 different kind of ERP instances because they have acquired a lot. A cold day in hell that they will simplify it to get it into one ERP environment or instance. Why? Because they will sell off part of their business in the near future. So, in my opinion, yeah, harmonizing your ERP landscape does make sense, but spend 100 million euros or dollars on it doesn't make sense.
And also, it takes
yeah,
a lot of time as well. So if you look at a roadmap of multi-years to get it in place,
yeah,
and you see in the first page how quickly the developments are, then if you only spend your time on that, you will miss out. So for me, there's almost no way that you should not kind of do something with innovation, maybe in parallel with kind of working on your ERP landscape.
yeah. Jonathan?
I'm honestly not a lot to add. I think we're pretty well aligned here. And I was talking earlier in the call and maybe prematurely about this exact issue.
Yeah,
I think the word hijack is exactly right. There's a lot of the big ERPs try to make the case that it is virtuous or beneficial to remain in the ecosystem, or that it's somehow going to have better performance. And A, that's just not true. And B, it does a disservice to the potential outcomes for the supply chain or indeed enterprise, because there are a lot of, looking at your subway map, leading edge specialized applications that could integrate very well.
yeah. And more recent picture is this one. How to create what I call a convergent planning tower. And what does it mean? The orders coming in at at their entrance, and they go into your ERP, and then one level up, they go into the execution layer, the SNOE, sales and operation execution, and then SNOP, and then into IBP. Yeah, I think there's still a difference between those two. We can argue. And on top, you have your end-to-end view of the rest of the market. Upstream, you could look at market supply, and downstream, you could market demand. And then you have your end-to-end view on both your channels and your suppliers, and you have your network design. So basically, this is what I think a planning tower would look like. And of course, at every layer, you have balconies looking out. One major question I get when I show this, I know there is software for SNOP, there's been branded and pushed a lot in the last 5 to 10 years. And now I see SNOE, sales and operations execution. That's hot, yes, because of all the turbulence of the last years with COVID, etc. Fulfillment is very important to be able to fulfill, to execute. And they ask, is there software available called SNOE? Yes or no? Yeah, it's TMS, WMS, MES, scheduling, order management. So that is SNOE kind of software. That is not packaged as such. So that's what I see lately. And then again, Peter, what do you see? Do you have this all in place? We are still replacing ERP sometimes, and yes, on the higher end we want to have some network design tools with for reshoring or whatever. Where do you see your needs coming up, because now you're in the field in a company?
Yes, it's actually a lot of questions, Martijn, that's
Yes.
Exactly.
in one question. So I was kind of thinking about how can I answer that. So maybe first of all, kind of I do kind of more or less understand kind of the different layers, right? So I think that's well understood, where we kind of you distinguish between more the operational side, the technical side, and the strategic
Yes.
side, so to say. So I think that's for me a bit of the framework which is aligned to that. I think quite logically, yeah. So I would say kind of the ERP is more the execution part, and then I see, to your point, that there's a lot of companies who have a lot of ERPs and spend a lot of time on that. Where for me, kind of the real question, okay, but what kind of data do I get out of that, and how can I use that data? And I think one of the key issues that I see then is that kind of the data that you get out and the master data that I got is just so poor that it's quite difficult to use it. So I think that is one of the things that I see when I look at this picture. The second thing is, yes, there's a lot of SNOP software, so planning software. And then for me, the question is now SNOE really, does it require software or is it more insights, right? So I would like to know if I can track my actual orders against my demand plan.
Mhm.
Do I need actual software for that, or is it more an insight that I need to have from, I don't know, an analytics layer? And the same goes for my supply plan. Do I get out of my factory what I've been planned for? Right. So I'm not sure if that is a technology or if that's an insight that I need to get out of the data that I have available.
I think you get a call tomorrow about a vendor who has a magic bullet for this.
Yeah. Okay.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Jonathan, if you look at this, there's an elevator, in the middle where you can do concurrent planning or something, go up and down in scheduling and production planning. But that's also my analogy.
Yeah, well, I know, Martijn, you led off by saying you believe it's another discussion that IBP and SNOP are two separate floors.
Yeah.
So I won't go down that rabbit hole. But I'm kind of with Peter here that I think directionally, I like this picture. I like the sort of movement from the short-term tactical to the long-term strategic.
Yeah.
I agree with that directionally, but I think there's a kind of a fuzziness between some of these different layers that isn't as clearly demarcated in reality as this diagram would conveniently make it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the things that are called SNOE can currently be done by classic ERP functions with additional, like Peter said, insight, which isn't
Yeah.
necessarily technology, but just analytics.
Yeah.
Personally, if we had another hour or two, I'd be happy to get into the discussion of SNOP versus IBP. I think let's agree that maybe this is a two-layer story. I don't know if they're necessarily as discretely divided as floors 3 and 4.
No.
But I like the way that Peter sort of summarized it, where we've got a tactical and executional layer, which is definitely distinct. We've got a strategic layer, and then there's analytics that kind of sit over both of those that make it possible to have the insights we need at every level of the business.
Yeah. So now next, we get deeper into the field of the IT landscape. So on the left you see SAP modules, and very slick for all kind of business functions. They have some sort of modules look like this. That's what they offer in the ERP and Oracle and Infor in a similar fashion. They have this kind of modules and logos for layers, etc. But on the right hand side, you see Lenovo, and this is publicly published, anyway. And this is their supply chain planning landscape. So this is not the whole company landscape. That's kind of complex and less slick and clean than you see in the left hand. So, and I think that knowing Lenovo, they have done a good job in my opinion. But then again, it's not so clear cut. What do you think, Peter?
No, and I think it is complicated, right?
Yeah.
So if it wasn't complicated, we probably wouldn't be talking about this, right? So
Yeah.
I think, I think maybe the left picture will give a bit of an impression that the world is quite easy to organize in supply chain. But I think that the reality is that maybe it's a bit less easy, and that you need really the time to understand kind of your supply chain end to end to make sure how to kind of link kind of the different systems to that. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jonathan, is it getting close to what you see in reality when you go into businesses?
I mean, the left isn't. The
left is the right side. I mean,
the left is close to the reality of what I'm seeing software vendors pitching to clients. But in fact, we're working with a large biotech right now that's in the middle of a deployment of some modules of SAP, and they asked us, "Hey, can you find out what each of the modules do? Because the demo looked great, but we don't know which ones we need and which ones we don't need." So I think software companies do a great job of painting an artificially ordered and serene picture of software architecture that just in practice doesn't exist. Going back to your previous diagram, I think that's one of the challenges. It's nice to be able to try to think about things in discrete and clearly delineated boxes, because it's the way we as humans want to think about things. But the reality is there's fuzziness, there's overlap, there's solutions that do multiple, that they tick multiple boxes, and other ones that just do one. And to Peter's point, it takes really understanding and learning about this to be able to do it properly. And that's the challenge. Not everybody has the time.
No, but I like, yeah.
Yes, so, and I think even as so today we talk about technology, but I don't even think that there's that many people in supply chain who holistically understand the full picture, right? And that even makes it more complicated. So because I think that you need to have that first before you can start really about kind of what it means from technology perspective.
No, but I love that Lenovo has taken the effort to create this slide on the right hand side to explain the different levels, operational, tactical, strategic, and add their knowledge. How does it interact, etc., on a supply chain basis, because they have a whole supply chain operating model behind it before they show this to show, okay, why do we need this? This overview. So that's why I like the Lenovo slide, although it might be complex and not so clean cut. But they have taken the effort to highlight the essential application they need for their operating model, and that's the good point. And basically, this triggered me one of these kind of slides. I had a conversation with a VP supply chain planning, EMEA level, and I asked her, do you have an overview of all your applications you need for your end-to-end supply chain? Well, our IT department has it, and it's, on an A0 poster shape, with all the APIs and the interconnections and okay. And I asked her, but you are responsible to choose the application you want. Yes, but you don't have your overview yourself. No. So you're relying on IT, and they have their own agenda. Yes. So basically, I say, you're in a stretch. Yes. And I say, yeah. Okay. So by the way, I take a long shot. I think hard about it, and I designed the IT supplement map. So I came about this. So basically, I think this is the company IT portfolio with all the things you can imagine. Hopefully, all the boxes are addressed. You can imagine that all the software vendors are pitching. From right hand side, even CRM might be of interest to you, especially in the field of make to order. Exactly. CRM is very important. Yep. And on the left is SRM, the supplier related stuff. And at the higher end, you have your reporting of ESG. Down below, you have your ERP, your system of record. And yes, you have a data lake. I think you have to have some sort of data lake to make sure that you're not totally dependent on your ERP aligning and reorganizing. So this is, and I take a long shot to compress all the known kind of boxes. And thanks for Gartner, there are some magic quadrants. I know, okay, they are there, but in some areas there are no magic quadrants, so I don't know how to put it. So I create my own box. And the interesting thing is, I have a business club in the Netherlands. I think 50 members from mid-sized to large companies, and we have we even have a chat group and WhatsApp. And a few months ago, there was one member that said, has one of you experience of product information management? Upper right, before we have this overview. And a whole conversation, this is a vendor, this one is sucking, this is good, whatever, this is implemented, this one. So, all of them are responding. I said, hold on, this is nice, you have this conversation, but now I'm creating this. So the next step would be you get this form, it's downloadable, so everybody in this call, you can download this and create your own overview, and you can put your company name to it, or even maybe per country, geography, business unit, division, whatever, and then you can fill out what kind of system you are using right now, and maybe find out some black boxes or white boxes, and then you have a better conversation. So for this VP supply chain I talked to a year ago, now she has the opportunity to fill it out, and then you have it, and you know it, and then you have an internal conversation. Now, is this the right one? And the next step I will be doing with this, the directors club, the members that are filling it out, and behind the scenes within Copilot, I will match members who have a similar company IT portfolio to the other. So I think you and you should be talking to each other because you have the same ERP environment, etc., and the likes, or in SAP, etc. So this is what I'm creating next to the IT super map, and then you can put in your boxes which do you have and which should you replace. Jonathon, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think as an internal tool, this is ingenious. It's a way for, and by the way, the example you gave about the supply chain person being responsible, in air quotes, for her technology, but not really knowing what's out there, is something we see all the time. IT often making decisions for the rest of the enterprise as to what application is best suited for them, even if it isn't necessarily. So I think internally, this is a really effective way of trying to make sense of sort of an inventory of what technologies we have deployed and what ones we may not.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the comments you made when you were introducing this about the supply chain club that you've got, where people were saying, I've got this PIM, and someone else was saying, well, I've got an experience with this one that kind of sucks. I think this is one of the challenges, again, of software selection. I made a post last week, I think, Martijn, you interacted with it, about wine ratings and the challenge of wine ratings and the challenge of software ratings. And there are objectively good quality traits in wine. So you could definitively say this is a bad wine and this is a good wine. But a wine that to someone rates a 90 versus to someone else it's a 96 or a 97. And I was talking with Robert Parker. Robert Parker, because of his specific tastes, directly influenced winemaking for 2 generations. People started making wines that were oakier, juicier, higher alcohol, because those are the wines that his palate would score the best.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same with software. Now, there's obviously objectively good functionality and bad functionality, but the nature of your business is really going to determine who's a great fit for you as well. And one of the first things we do when we're working with a client who's saying, like, help me choose a demand planning solution, we don't even ask about requirements to begin with. We begin by looking at data. We look at replenishment data, we look at sales data, we look at demand data. Because if the nature of that business is such that it's project and event based, we know that we could go and select the world's most sophisticated, statistically driven engine. That's not what they need, because the nature of their data dictates that this is going to require a lot more human intervention. So what I'm saying in a long-winded way is, directionally, there's good and bad, no question. But when it comes to the specific applicability to one company, this is why there's just no getting around. You have to have a very deep understanding of your needs at both a data and requirement level before you can see really what matches what your company can actually make use of, not just because it's in the leaders quadrant of Gartner's Magic Quadrant.
So Peter, you're also advising a supply chain software scale up in France. So you have a view, and my point with this overview, I don't necessarily mean that you have for each box a different vendor. It could be addressed by some boxes can be simultaneously addressed by more than by just one. So what's your view when you are looking and advising this is French supply chain software vendor?
Yes, so maybe there's two reflections here before kind of answering to your question, Martijn. So kind of I was looking at this picture and I was kind of saying, okay, but how many boxes are actually here on the slide, right? So it's quite a lot, right? So some of the question beyond, what vendor to take is also where to prioritize first. So if I'm going to advise a customer, then my question is always, okay, but what do we want to achieve in the long run?
Yeah.
And how am I going to make sure that what I'm doing and where I'm investing my valuable time and money in, it's making sense? Because probably I can't work on everything at the same time, right? So I think that's the first comment. And then the second comment is, yes, probably you will have vendors who can do a couple of these boxes, but probably not all. So you need to integrate at some point of time, right? Which is also quite complex. Then in terms of kind of the work that I'm doing, let's say also with startups, is that kind of, first of all, I've tried to work with them to have a very clear message. Okay, but what are you actually addressing, right?
Yeah.
So from value perspective, but also from the perspective around, okay, but what do you actually do? And can you make very clear on what you're doing? And then I think based on that, I think for a startup, you need to be really good at something first before you expand, basically, right? So I want to be very good at all of it, but that's probably going to be very difficult. So start with something, I don't know, demand planning or supply planning or inventory management, and become really good at it before extending to something new.
Yeah. No, good point. And now we're nearing the end of our webinar, and we have a few slides left. So basically, this is what I created, because I know the Magic Quadrant by Gartner, and honestly, it was never designed for software selection. Gartner people told me myself in the late '90s, and even you can read it in small letters as a remark. So basically, I said, in my opinion, you have to look at supply chain software on 4 dimensions. First, functionality, we all know it, and this list of wanted functionality gets longer and longer every time. And then technology, is it on-premise or is it cloud native, etc. That's one thing. But I think the lower two, especially delivery implementation, is I think way more important than the functionality, because most of the functionality is not always being used by the users, maybe 10 or 50% of all the functionality. And the green one, domain expertise, say in inventory management, the knowledge, are they working with universities? Do they, try out different algorithms, that kind of stuff? That's missing. So I think, you can use this slide for each individual vendor and to make a dot in each quadrant, and then decide, which quadrant is the one we want to compare some vendors. That's what I'm thinking. Jonathan, if you look at this and you have experience of addressing software selection for your clients.
Yeah, I'm with you on this one, Martijn. I think everyone wants to focus on the functionality piece. And absolutely, I agree that the delivery component is at least as important. We mentioned it earlier. It doesn't matter if you've got the best technology in the world, if you can't actually deploy it effectively, it doesn't matter. So looking at these dimensions, I think, is a really important way of evaluating. And to go back to Johan's question from much earlier in the call, this is a great way of taking that large list and breaking it down into a shorter list, understanding a lot more of this. That said, I think we've kind of highlighted this over the conversation as well. As effective and convenient as heuristics or shortcuts are at sort of simplifying complex landscapes, you're also going to lose something in translation. So this is a great way to start, but I think there's always going to be, a little bit of there's no getting around. You're going to have to go a little bit deeper in understanding what some of these ratings specifically mean. I mean, knowledge is one I'm looking at in particular, where directionally it matters. But do I want the company age to ultimately be the decision, the tiebreaker between a couple of technologies? I'm not sure.
And in the delivery part, sorry to interrupt, Peter, but delivery part, it's also very important. Do supply chain software vendors implement themselves, or do they have implementation partners? I know, in Europe, that some implementation partners from vendors themselves are flying over from US to implement in Europe. Is that the right way? Do you want to do, depending on Americans flying in to Europe to implement it, or do you want to have people on site close at home? These are things. Are these people from the software vendors themselves, or are you relying on Capgemini, Deloitte, Accenture, you name it? And these are also things you have to address early on. What do you think, Peter?
Yes, so yes, for sure. I think it's all important. And for me, once again, so the starting point for me is, okay, but what kind of company am I? So where am I today, and where would like to be? And I don't think that every company wants to be maybe stage 5 in Gartner terms. So that depends also a bit kind of on what technology that you're going to select. I was kind of looking at it and thinking, okay, but I think that probably price is also important at some point of time. So I'm not sure how that kind of links into this picture, Martijn.
Yeah.
But kind of overall, and maybe also, I think you're saying more or less the same, Jonathon. But I think to some kind of extent, if you're going to select the software, you need to have the trust that kind of the company that you're going to work with is going to deliver that for you.
Yeah.
And that is partly kind of having the right functionality. It's partly kind of delivering it, and partly understanding me. So having the knowledge of the business that I'm in. And then, of course, it needs to have a good technology. But let's say my point of view is, and maybe that's a bit my point of view, is that I would rather have someone maybe from IT kind of define if the technology is good or not, and then let me focus on the functionality, the delivery, and the knowledge.
Yeah, good point. There's a question from startups. We are almost out of time, and but this is what also you been doing since 2018. So analyzed over 250 supply chain startups, and these are only the ones that 5 years or younger. And you see 10 categories. Basically, 2018-19, there were a lot of startups on the right-hand side, with road freight matching and e-fulfillment and that kind of stuff. Most of them failed, basically. What you still remaining, in the planning area, in the blue ones, you see a lot of startups and scale-ups in Europe popping up. Also inventory visibility area, and in the green area, a lot of them in Europe are, coming out of the sustainability area about, carbon accounting. And for example, Sweep have raised 100 million euro out of France a few years ago. Carbon also a lot of money, I think 30 or 40 million. The thing is, sustainability is lower on the radar right now because they have a hard time selling it now because CSRD has been postponed to some extent. So in the green area, you will see that some of them will be bought by the existing ones. And, Big Pledge in the middle in the green area has been bought by Blue Yonder. So also, and I showed this to Jonathon. They said, gee, I see a lot of them I don't even know. Yeah, there's a whole world out there. And it could be useful to have a look at it because they are very proud. I know a lot of founders coming out of supply chain and building supply chain software, and all of them is AI related. So this is all native and the newest piece around. So that's the good part. Before we get there, just Jonathon, next gen planning. There's so much around where to start, and you see customer reviews. That's important. Some comment from your side here.
Yeah. Going back to earlier comments in the conversation, I think understanding the requirements piece is obviously important, but understanding the nature of your business is really critical, and that goes right down to what is the data telling me about the state of the demand profiles and the state of the replenishment profiles that exist in my supply chain. And then from there, looking not just reputationally, but anecdotally and looking at use cases and references around implementation and post-implementation support. These are all equally important components of making the selection. And then when we're talking about next gen, to be honest, I think there's so many companies out there on antiquated platforms that are last gen or the generation before that even effective deployment of what's there today would make a massive difference in their capability for planning. But final comment, again, I love the idea of digital transformation, and the umbrella of digital transformation has found a lot of engagements for me and my team lately. but the focus shouldn't be on the digital part. The focus is on the transformation. You need to understand what is that end state, and you need to understand what is it you're driving for, and then you leverage the digital piece to get there. Digital is not the goal.
Sorry, Peter, we have to wrap up soon, So I have a few slides. Basically, when you are selecting software, it's like choosing a car. It's,
I love the American sedan.
Yeah, the combustion engine, that's one. And look at the point, don't ask for PowerPoint presentations, but for live demos. These are, the traditional ones, and they are, converting it to into the cloud. So these are the startups, and the upper right one is also discontinued. So this is the new breed. What do you want? And maybe you are still on premise with your ERP, and you want to add, in the cloud applications next to that. These are the things you have to consider. And with startups and scale-ups, they are all native and all AI, but used for ask for reference of live customers, and there's a risk of the new kind of cars. And to wrap it up, basically, match your maturity with your supply chain software. Otherwise, you can have this kind of mishaps. So that's to wrap it up. We are all already over time. Time's flying when you're having fun. So no time for Q&A. But the good news is, right after this, we will be joining in the virtual lounge. So if you want to talk with one of us or all three of us, join us at the table, at table 1 in the virtual lounge, and we can have an extra 30 minutes conversations to have some more thoughts about this. Of course, there are some links to download all these overviews and assessments to make it work for yourself. And of course, next to them, you have to call Jonathon and Peter to make it work for yourself. And with this, Jonathon, thank you.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Martijn.
Peter, also thank you for joining me.
Yeah, nice conversation. Thanks a lot, Martijn.
Yeah, thank you for listening in, either live or in a recording. Thank you for joining us. I hope you like it and have some new views on this complex world. And maybe you have some more questions, so maybe we will see you next in the virtual lounge. It's easy to get there, and we don't bite. Thanks for now, and maybe see you another time. And I would say thank you. Bye-bye.